It is my privilege to reintroduce Antoinette Martin to start with Fate, our mini series, part two from last week. And everybody probably got one of these. Hopefully you did. And we're going to be talking about today, I believe, our barriers, our accelerators, and what you get in return. Antoinette, it's all you.
All right, thanks, Steve. And this worksheet was originally designed almost as long ago as Steve's other picture is old. So it may look a little kitschy, but the content is what we want to focus on today. And how many of you, be honest, you won't hurt my feelings. How many of you did the homework assignment, which was to get through at least the boundaries and the accelerators and maybe bounce it off a significant other or a best friend or someone who knows you well? You put it in the chat, come off, mute, raise your hands, whatevs.
Okay, keep your hands raised so she can see.
Okay, so Dax, Oliver, Jason. All right. Okay. So the content here is very relevant for that part of the conversation that we started last week around what types of questions do you ask when you go into a job interview to get the real answers? Because you and I have both been in so many interviews where you give them the answers that you think they want, and they give you the answers that either they've been trained to give you or that they think you want. And how do we break down that barrier and get to real so that you can validate, is this a company? Is this a boss that I even want to work with? Is it worth my time? Or once I get into the seat, am I going to be like hideously miserable, like potentially I was in my last job, right? Because I didn't ask the right questions, or I didn't ask the questions in a way that enabled me to see beyond the facade. So when we talk about, part of the title of this session is emotional intelligence, right? And some of you may be tired of that phrase, especially Tammy, working in HR for a long time. But when we talk about emotional intelligence in the job interview, I'm not talking about your ability to grit it through or to bounce back from failure or from setbacks. What I'm talking about is knowing yourself well enough to be able to ask the right questions in an interview and be able to have the confidence because you know yourself well enough, you know what questions you should be asking to push for the answers that you need instead of just taking what they give you, right? Because there are, let's see, it was one of the AI devices last time where it said something in response to something I said, and then they said wah wah wah. And I think it was like the Alexa or the Google app. But that's what we want to avoid, right? Because that wastes your time. It's depressive, right? How many of you have come out of an interview and you're like, wow, that was an epic waste of my time? And you may feel that that responsibility was on you. You may feel that it was the responsibility of the people you interviewed with, or just life in general sucks for a minute or two. So as we go through the boundaries and the accelerators, Dax, as you went through them, tell me what you thought. And it can be good, bad. You do not have to say, it was wonderful, it changed my life. Not expected, right?
Um, so yeah, my answer is going to sound maybe cynical. But I have done this sort of thing before and found it very valuable. This time it was harder for me to. I'm at 11 months of looking for a job, and at this point, like these types of considerations are really down low on my list behind, paying bills and putting food on the table and that kind of stuff. So I've, I mean, even within the past couple of weeks, I've walked out of interviews that I've had that feeling with and still known if they call me up, I will take this job. Like, and then figure out the next step to getting to a place where that I would enjoy. The positive side is that the best job I ever had, I thought that when I took the job. And there were things about it that I didn't anticipate, and I learned about myself of what gives me energy and stuff. So in theory, I love this type of thing. I think it's important for us all to know, just like being like raw and honest in where my personal journey is right now. It's hard to get to this place of this being a priority, like
Mhm.
a decision factor for me right now.
Right. No, that's absolutely fair, Dax. And quite honestly, I've been there myself, right? Where I took a job where I was like, I'm gonna be miserable, but I have to pay the bills, right? Because I was a sole provider for our family at that point, and it's scary, right? And I'd been out of work for about 7 months at that point. So as we look at that, yes, that could be our reality. But the other part, exactly what you said, right? There is value in knowing these things and learning more about yourself so that when you're miserable, you can root cause it, right? You can say, why am I miserable? Is it because my boundaries are being violated? Or is it because I have zero accelerators happening in this job, right? Like, it's a great job. It honors me. They praise me. They do all these things that are like no goes for me, but there's no energy, there's no joy, right? And then being able to have that confidence that says, yes, I can still do this and slog it through. And this is how I know to approach my job search, and I can do both concurrently, right? So that's a really good point that Dax brings up. And if you guys are feeling like you're in that spot, please don't beat yourself up. Please don't think it's the end of the world. It's just part of what is for some of us as we go through that job search. Okay, so let's go through the boundaries portion. And Jason, you said that you went through it as well, right?
I
And
did.
then, and then there was one more. Oliver, you went through it too, right?
And so did Liz. And
Okay.
Liz doesn't have a camera, so she put it in the chat that she did.
Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we'll take, let's see, maybe we'll go in reverse. So let's start with the boundaries first. And let me explain a little bit for those of you that didn't have a chance to get to the worksheets or who are new coming into this and you're like, I had 24 hours, I'm not doing this. The reason why boundaries are important is because all of us have those things in our emotional, mental makeup that are deal breakers. They're no-goes, right? And for me personally, I'll tell you one of mine, and you may be like, that's no biggie, right? But for me, if someone mocks or criticizes the ability or intellectual capacity of someone else, that's a huge deal breaker for me. Like I ended personal relationships because of that. I ended and walked out of jobs because of that. Because if someone is going to mock the capacity of someone else, then at some point they're going to do that to me. And they're going to do it to everyone on their staff. And that is not acceptable to me. Right. Now, for my husband, that's not a deal breaker for him. What's a deal breaker for him is someone intentionally trying to undermine him. And for me, that's not a deal breaker because I'm like, oh, game on, let's play. Right? So we all have our own deal breakers. So let's walk through a little bit of what we found about our boundaries and to what Dax mentioned to me last week. Let's design the questions to help suss this out to see if the environment, the company, or the manager is going to be able to honor or not what's important to you, or if the company culture honors or not. So Liz, would you mind talking to us about what you discovered about your boundaries? And then we'll build interview questions around those.
Certainly, I kind of kept my boundaries like just for looking at job posts like we were last week and things that would stop me dead in my tracks from applying to that job.
Or things that are boundaries and deal breakers just in your personal life too,
Mhm.
right? Because we have to bring our whole selves to work
Mhm.
or we break a lot faster.
Right, right. Yeah. The first one I have is if there's an on-call 24/7, 265 on the listing. And it's like, no way, we're humans and we have lives outside of work.
I love that. All right. So, Liz, what's an easy-ish question that you could build to be able to figure out if that really means what you think it means in the job description,
Mhm.
or if you sense that that might be part of it based on conversations you've had with HR or what you see in the job description? How could you figure out, other than just asking them,
Mhm.
right? What are some situational questions that you might be able to ask to figure out what's really going on?
Mhm. Let's see. Normally it's like an on-call schedule. You're only on it a little while. So maybe is the on-call session like a constant, or is there like working through the team days on, days off?
That's a great question to ask.
Mhm.
And they may give you a squishy answer or they may give you a real answer.
Mhm.
I really love asking situational
Mhm.
questions because then I have an ability to see how they respond with their body language.
Mhm.
And body language isn't always visible,
Mhm.
right? And Dax, I think it was maybe you or my class session who kind of alluded to this as we were talking through job descriptions, where you can read through what's printed and get the vibe. You don't have to hear the words or the tone or see how they respond, right? So a situational question to that could be, tell me about the ebb and flow of this role. When are peak on times and when are peak off times? And what you're looking for in that is, how do they answer? Number one, right? Do they give you what you're looking for? But then how aware are they of the true ebb and flow of the role? Because if you're talking to the manager and they're like, well, I think you're kind of on for a few hours and then you might be off for a few hours and then it's just kind of hit or miss. What does that tell you about the manager?
Right. Yeah. Like how involved really are they?
Right? Do they know their team? Right. And then a
Mhm.
follow-up question that I love, and I think I mentioned this last week as well, is so they give you their answer, and it could be the HR department, it could be the manager, it could be a peer interview. Follow-up question I love to ask is, would the team or my peers agree?
Mhm.
What would
Mhm.
they say?
Ooh, that is a good one.
Right. And
Mhm.
that, again, I love asking that. And I can't tell you how many times a manager has about come unglued.
Oh dear.
Not like angry unglued, but like
Ooh.
uncomfortable, like
Oh.
squirming in their seat. And I'm like, oh, you've never been challenged, which tells me something else, right? Because one of my
Mhm.
boundaries is I have to have an environment where creativity and innovation and um, disagreement is
Mhm.
allowed to exist. And so if he squirms when I ask that question, that generates another question for me, right? Or he or she squirms, right?
Mhm.
Because then I'll say, tell me about a time when someone on the team really struggled with this environment. How did you handle it? And how did the team handle it?
Mm.
And that tests their willingness to share uncomfortable things and whether or not they manage conflict in a way that's important to you,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Okay. Is there another one that you want to play with, Liz?
Yeah, let's see. I have two others. One of them, since we have more girls hanging out with us on their Monday shows, I'll hit my third point instead is being in tech. So being any woman in STEM, if I am the only female in the room.
Mhm.
Like if I know DEI is going away, but I have been the DEI hire before because they had a team of 7 guys on an IT team and no girls, and they had to hire a girl. And I'm like, am I really here because of my resume and my previous work and what I'm capable of? Or are you putting pity on me because you need a chick in tech?
So that's a valid question, right? Because depending on why,
Mm-hmm.
that influences how you come into the role and how you show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comes with it all kinds of different insecurities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So what kinds of questions, and I loved how Dax said this to me last week in a conversation through LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And Dax, forgive me if I'm not quoting true to form, but his question was, how do we structure these questions so that we don't seem to be like whiny or difficult, right? I don't want to be whiny or difficult. I'm not whiny or difficult, but I have some things that really matter.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get to the root of that without being labeled the troublemaker before I even get hired, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dax, I think that's what you were getting at, right? Okay.
Ooh. So I could almost word it like, could you tell me about the other people on the team? And normally they'll go like by name. And if it's all guy names, it's like, oh, well.
But and we make assumptions based on our history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my favorite therapists was told me one time, he's like, Antoinette, we all have our books. We all have these books that we've created because of the experiences in our lives. And we reference those books continually because it builds the framework in which we think we're operating safely, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we make assumptions about other people and situations in order to try to be safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Dax, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to add that um, a spin that's possible to put on this question could be how they include everyone's input or voice from the team in project planning or decision making or whatever aspect you want to finish that off with.
Mm-hmm. Good
Uh,
point.
I love that. That's a great one. Another add-on to that line of questioning, Liz, would be, tell me about the dynamic of your team. What balances do you have in your team? Who brings the energy? Who brings the smarts? Who's the mentor? What kind of team dynamic do you have going on? And what roles do you feel are empty? And then you can say, I'm asking because I want to better understand what role I would play in the team.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And again, there you're looking for how aware is this manager or leader in, because for Mike, you wouldn't be a manager, right? You'd be reporting to like executive vice presidents or even CEOs. But how aware are they of what gaps they have on the team? And do they recognize the strengths that everyone brings?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then if they're able to articulate through that, that's great. And you'll be able to say, I love that dynamic. And you're right, it does sound like X is missing from the mix. Let me tell you about how I brought that particular thing to the team I worked with previously, right? Because one of the reasons why we were looking at the job descriptions last week is what problem are they trying to solve, right? So they're trying to bring someone in that can do a job, but in addition to do a job, they need it to complement the team. They need it to attain more objectives, and they want it to be a cohesive environment so that people like their jobs, right? At the end of the day, that's what leaders need. We need you to like your job. We need you to do good at it. And we need you to not cause problems and maybe lift the rest of the team and raise the bar. Right. And so in the interview process, you're looking for signals and answers to, oh, I love how you pointed that out. Let me tell you about how I did that in my last team. You're trying to show them how you solve the problems that they're looking to solve with the hire.
Nice. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Oliver, do you want to go next with some of your boundaries?
Yeah, sure, I'll be happy to. The This was kind of hard for me. I don't know why, but I took me quite a while to kind of come to to anything. I think I've got in my mindset that if I have a job, it's my job just to do it and to make it work, and deal with all the problems that come along. But I did I did go back and think hard about things that were particularly problematic for me. And one of them was being in an environment where I feel like the different parts of the company are working against each other. Like there's no teamwork. Like I'm being warned, don't talk to those people, or if we're in a meeting and they bring something up, don't let them know what's happening in our department. And that was very frustrating to me.
Right? Because there's all kinds of legal things that happen when those conversations are had, right? Um, and it's destabilizing for you, right? Because especially in your quality manager role and your quality manager mindset, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. What other things aren't we being told? And how does that compromise the mission? How does it compromise the deliverable for the customer, right? Raises all kinds of issues. All right, let's play with this one, Oliver, because you're not the only person who feels this way, right? Or who has experienced this. So let's explore it. There's more than one way to peel away at these layers, right? And Mike, I know that you've encountered this before too. So any input you have here on how to structure the questions would be great. So let's take it down to right at the meeting level, right? So Oliver talked about things that are said in a meeting that are like warning signs, right? Red flags. Now, in the meeting, depending on the culture, Oliver could say, can we explore that for just a minute? Help me understand why we would take that approach, right? Now, Oliver may already know that that question is not an okay question at the table, in which case I hope you're looking for another job, right? But so that's in the moment. But if I'm in a job interview and I've experienced that before, and I do not want to experience that again because it's just too stressful and frustrating, a question or two that I might ask would be, we work in a really high pressure industry. And from what you've described, this job is going to be intense. And we work with people who may have competing agendas. Tell me how the different orgs or competing agendas work together in this organization. How do you pressure test each other and still deliver what you're supposed to? Now, that could be a little bit of a complex question. You probably could streamline it a little bit, but if they ask you to repeat it, right? Because interviewers are not used to being asked complex questions by interviewees. They're used to being asked, when will I hear about the job? When can we talk about salary? Right? They're not used to being asked these complex questions that kind of poke at culture, management theory, and team dynamic. So there's one. Oliver, tell me how you think that would work as a question in the industry that you're in.
I don't know. I don't know. I think the idea of asking the question in the sense of, tell me about the different sections of the company that I will need to interact with, and how those the information sharing between those sections of the company and the QA are expected to take place. Maybe tell me about a time where there was I like this idea of competing agendas between one of the plants and the QA section, and how you handled that situation where those agendas did not line up.
Mhm. I love how you bring up the tell me about a time. Because remember, we're looking for situational questions where they have to describe what really happened, or we hope they describe what really happened, right? So you could say, tell me about a time when a couple of departments involved in producing the final result had competing agendas. Excuse me. How did that work? What went well? And what do you think could have been better? You don't want to say what went wrong, because that causes all kinds of stress. But you could say, how could it have been better? Right. And then you could say, depending on what they share, you could say, wow, tell me about the role of the QA person in that dynamic. Right. And then you would find out if the manager is one who's like, my role is the gatekeeper, and I know not to put my team under that kind of pressure. So I handled this. The role of the QA person was to bring the data, right? Their role was to bring the evidence, and I handled the conflict, right? That's, for me, that would be the manager that I would look to work for because they understood their role in both removing barriers, but maintaining the integrity of my team or my peers. Mike, have you encountered something similar, and what different questions might you ask?
First off, I love the suggestions, Antoinette. Those were really good ones. As a hiring manager, if somebody asked me that question, I would, keeping in mind, my background and the fact that I'm looking to hire people who are smarter than me, I would love that question. In fact, it would impress me in a very positive way in the interview. Oliver, another approach that you might consider if you're more comfortable with it is to find out who in the organization you would be allowed to interact with. That's a fairly direct question. It can be a little uncomfortable for the person receiving it, especially if they're one of those territorial micromanager types, which would be a good red flag for me. But talk about getting to know people, getting to understand the different parts of the business, how they all fit together, so that you can optimize your contribution. And how is this person? Who would this person want to connect you with across the organization? That gives them a chance to be the good person. Who in the first 2 weeks would they want you to meet? That says you're looking to onboard quickly and get to know people. If they say, no, don't worry about that, run for the hills, my personal opinion. So, and one of my best managers, she was all about putting me in front of anybody and everybody. She put me in front of the CEO. She put me in front of the entire C-suite. She put me in front of the entire operations team. And then shortly after she left, I was reporting to the CMO, and she was real nervous about that sort of stuff. Of course, we also had a change in management team, and I think she was nervous about reporting, about her personally appearing before these same people. So sometimes it's a reflection of insecurity. So those are my undisciplined random thoughts.
No, definitely disciplined because it is born from experience, right? And those are all fantastic explanations. And I loved how you focused on that question around who would you introduce me to? And we touched a little bit on the importance of that last week in reading through the job descriptions, because Oliver, especially for you in the industry that you're looking for, you want to know how they're going to onboard you for success, right? And someone at Mike's level could ask questions like, will I be involved in structuring my onboarding plan? right? Because Mike knows from his history what matters to him and kind of the questions he asks. So he'd want to be involved in that process. For us at our level, we would be wanting to know, what does my onboarding plan look like? And I think we mentioned that last week, Oliver, with yours, is if they don't have an onboarding plan for you, or like run for the hills, like Mike said, right? Because they don't know how to set you up for success, right? And you can even be that bold, right? And I love how Mike called that out. Be bold. You could say, how do you set me up for success? Or how did you set the last hire up for success? And what would you do differently? To see if they think that they have the plan down pat, or if they're like, yeah, we tried that and we learned. And with you, we're going to do things a little differently. Right? And along those lines, one thing that I like to ask and you sometimes hit interviews where you're like, whoa, there's a lot of water under these bridges, right? Especially if you're in a panel interview. Um, question that I like to ask is, what would enable you to succeed as an individual, right? And I'd ask this of a random person, could be the manager, could just be someone else on the panel. What would enable you as the individual to succeed? And then I'd turn to a different person and say, what do you think is needed to enable the success of the team? So that you can see what dynamics are at play, and so that you can see how they work together. Back to your original point, right? Are they going to be a bit of a cluster and things are said behind the back and nothing ever really gets done? How do you manage that, right? All right, Oliver, did you have another boundary that you wanted to talk about?
Uh, um,
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry,
Yeah,
Oliver.
Braden, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
So, when you're asking these questions, is it okay to, if they then tell you something about, like what they're expecting or whatever, is it okay to then say what skill you have that would be relevant to that? Almost like you were setting yourself up to knock a question out of the park, not to sound like you were, but if it is relevant or it is something that you're excited about, or is that kind of seem almost like bad because you're like, you know, tell me if you're looking for a person with a beard, and then they say, yes, we're looking for a person with a beard, and you're like, well, actually, I have a beard. Like, is that bad? Or
No.
are you asking the questions just to find out the information for yourself? Or are you asking also to be able to, I guess, further the interview and show them more of your skill set?
So yes. Okay. So yes, absolutely okay to follow up with, and I think we touched a little bit on this with Liz as well. Absolutely okay to follow up with, wow, that sounds intense, or that sounds like a lot. Let me tell you about how I navigated that in my last role, right? Or I've been told that I have an extremely phenomenal skill set when it comes to bridging gaps between competing organizations. Let me tell you how that worked in my last job, or let me tell you about my favorite experience where I almost epically failed, but then we were able to bring it together, right? Because then you're showing them that not only do you understand what they just said, that you understand how to navigate those situations, that you may have either failed or almost failed before, and this is what you learned, and this is what you can bring to the table now because of what you learned, right? So absolutely perfectly okay and desired that you would come back with responses like that, right? It's also okay to ask follow-up questions where not only okay, thank you for your answer, manager. Would your team feel the same way? Or how would your team answer? But if there's something in their answer that you're like, oh, I want to follow up on that, it's perfectly okay to say, Thank you for that really detailed answer. And I actually heard something in there that I'd like to further explore with you. You mentioned law, right? Tell me more about that. That sounds like it could have been heavy or could have been really exciting. Tell me about how you and your team navigated that, or tell me more, right? I don't know if you've ever had an executive or a leader who used that phrase, and it drives me nuts because I always tell them more. Like, even when I don't want to tell them more, when they're like, tell me more, I'm like, oh, well, blah, right? And we're all human. We want to know that what we think is valued, and we want to share more, right? So tell me more. Can you explain what you meant by, Or to your point, Braden, can I tell you how I helped my last group navigate that? And another good follow-up question, and then you tell them, and then you can say, how would that approach be received in this group? Because you want to know if the skills that you're coming with are going to be like, whoa, that's way too kitschy or that's way too cool. We're not ready for that, right? Because you may have a skill set that will solve the problem. They may not want the problem solved. Does that answer your question, Braden?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. All right. Oliver, did you have another boundary that you wanted to explore, or was that your primary?
That was my primary. I've jotted a couple things down, but I don't know that they're worth exploring right now.
Okay. All right. Well, if you change your mind, yell at us, okay? All right. Dax, can we pick on you?
Absolutely.
All right.
So mine, I'm trying to think how to express this so we work it into something valuable. My biggest boundary is that I'm trying hard to avoid getting stuck doing the one thing that's my biggest strength. So specific to me, and we can make this more general so it applies to everybody, but specific to me, I came up as a writer, before content was the word for it, and then through content, I am a really, really, really good writer, a very good editor too. And over the last decade, I've worked really hard to like move my skill set into strategy and then more into like marketing strategy and not even like be stuck in that like content area. But inevitably, regardless of what I get hired for, inevitably becomes, well, Dax, you're the best writer, so we need you to write this. And then that like snowballs into me in my cubicle just writing all day. And I'm like, well, you hired me to be the run the strategy. You hired me to do this and to run the other people, not do this thing. And I honestly like I hate it now. Like I know I'm good at it, but it burns me out to the fact that for the first 6 months of me in my job search, I was bending over backwards not to tell people when they asked me what my marketing specialty was, not to use the word content because inevitably it would be like, oh, well, content creator. And so that's like that's a huge boundary for me. But also, I know it's probably the thing that can get me hired.
All right. That is a heavy cross to bear, right? Because we all have that one thing where, like, yes, I know I'm good at it, but I don't want to do it again, right? Okay. All right, Dax, what kind of questions would you ask? What do you think?
Um, I have asked before what the structure of and this sort of depends on the exact role. If it's a more content, like a content director role versus a marketing director or something. But either way, there's some version of that question, which is what the structure of either content creation or like asset creation, marketing, what the structure of creative is within that. If there's a team, if they're using outside vendors, something to that effect.
Right. Absolutely valid question. You should be asking about what's the structure of the team and how outside vendors come into play, right? And for Oliver, that would translate for you into, and I think we touched on this last week as well, what's the role of quality, and then what's the role of safety, and are they both internal to the company or external, because they kind of dovetail into each other. All right, so Dax, another question that you could ask is, tell me about the composition of the team from an internal and external perspective. And as you tell me about the composition, tell me what strengths are there and where you see glaring holes, right? So then you're not asking, please tell me you have a competent writer, because I don't want to do that, right? You're letting them navigate through. And you know what goes into marketing plans, successful marketing plans, and teams, right? So if they don't happen to mention one or two or three things, then I would ask about that. Tell me about your internal writing or your internal content creation. Because in the companies where I've worked, marketing sometimes gets slated with internal comms, right? So yeah, I'm hired to sell your product on the outside, but here I am writing your CEO's latest quarterly update, right? Not my game, not my jam, right?
Have you
So
been spying on my life, or you?
no, I worked really closely with a lot of marketing teams who also had charge of making the CEO look pretty. So so ask those questions, right? Because then you're saying, tell me more about, right? And I loved that Mike put it in the chat. One of the other questions that you could ask, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change on your team? Or in your case, Dax, what strengths would you add to your team? Right? And you can even be more specific. What marketing strengths would you add to the team? Right? And with your role, you're going to run into leaders who know what makes a good marketing team, and leaders who are just like, well, I've been told I need a marketing team. Right? And so it's that investigative process, right? We talked about being a detective, or for counterintelligence with your job search or the job description. You're kind of doing the same thing with your interviews specific to you and your role, right? You're looking for, do they know themselves well enough, and do they know what's missing, right? And if they're hedging and they just can't seem to get where you're going, it's okay to be more direct and tell them, I function really well in an organization that knows what it needs or is open to discovering what it needs. Which organization are you? Where are you on that growth path? And if they say they're on the, well, we need to discover what we need, then you can say, okay, so what have you done so far? And what do you think would resonate with the leadership team as we discover that together? Right? Because you're looking for, you're not saying, well, I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with how you've designed it, right? Because that would be whiny and opinionated. But you're saying, let me figure out if I can help you, right? And then back to Oliver's questions before as well is, how do you work together, and how do you like to be told when you're wrong? Right? But you don't say it in those words, because those are fighting words, right? You ask the investigatory question. Tell me about a time when you knew you had to make a complete pivot with your marketing program. Tell me about how that worked, because Those are hard things to come up against. And how did the team work together? And if you could wave a magic wand over that process a year ago, what would have been different? And then to Braden's question, you could say, yeah, that part is so hard. Let me tell you how I navigated that at this other company. And do you anticipate having to make complete pivots like that in the future? And what would you want to do to set yourself and the team up for success?
So Dax, I think summarizing what it comes down to is you've got that wonderful skill but unless you want to show it off, ask questions 1 or 2 levels above that.
Yep.
I mean, I'm a research geek, okay? Academically trained in how to do experimental design and analysis. Honestly, I could do that all day and I probably would love it. But I used that to get into a position of leadership. And now, am I looking for a job where I can be a research geek? Maybe, if necessary, and if the rewards are right. But I'm really focusing more at the leadership level now. But I did have a really interesting conversation at one point with one hiring manager. I gave him my resume, and it's very leadership heavy with some support from research and statistics and so forth. And then I showed him a grid that I'd printed off 9 case studies where my research got big results for my clients. Like, one's at $1 billion in revenue, another's at 12 billion in revenue. There's another one that's closer to 17 billion in revenue. And then there's some smaller ones too. His reaction, he held up the resume, he says, "This is the steak." And then he held up the 9 case studies. And he said, "And this is the sizzle." So Dax, use your brilliant writing to put the sizzle on whatever steak you're trying to pursue.
Mike, if you feel comfortable, would you flash it on the screen for a quick sec?
Yeah, I can do that.
I think it might be insightful, but you don't have to leave it up there for a long time. Meaning that, nobody needs to go oh, I'll use this. No, it's your intellectual property. And, but I think we all possess some of this. And part of this job search process is to realize, what have we done of value that other people don't know about? They need to know.
That was actually really valuable to a follow-up question I was going to have, because to Oliver's question, someone asked me that, like, if I was going to wave a magic wand and create the team I wanted, what would my hires be in what order? And when I said that the first person I would hire was a writer, the answer was, well, you're a writer. Why would you hire a writer first? And I don't remember exactly what I said. It wasn't my greatest answer because I wasn't prepared for it. But in retrospect, I was like, well, because if someone else is doing the writing, that actually allows me to bring the value that you're hiring me for, which is to look at the strategy and to run the rest of the team and bring the team together. But what you said, Mike, actually adds on to that, because in my previous role, during the time before I got stuck in the corner writing, was when I discovered a way to use one of their tools, which actually led to their best revenue year of all time. And if I had been in the corner writing, I never would have found that answer. And so you saying that, Mike, makes me realize that that's the answer, and that's the thing I need to highlight. So I appreciate that.
Good. I guess my work here is done.
No jumping off yet. Sorry.
Okay. Here's the 9 case studies. The format's pretty straightforward. It's what vertical, what the testing was, what the revenue impact, cost impact, and then anything else that the client shared with me in shortest possible terms. It's still a lot of words, but so I used color highlighting to hit the revenue and the cost impacts. just in case people don't want to read all the details.
I mean,
And
But you can see there's some big numbers.
you forced him to read what was important. Just kidding.
well, and the inclusion of the numbers, that's something that's often missing from resumes or from cover letters even, right? And it's the numbers that quantify the impact that you bring. And as you're doing the interviewing as well, it's not just, oh, well, I made a really big impact on this team when I helped them solve this problem. It's, I reduced processing time by 60 hours a month when I helped them implement this thing that also allowed them to cut costs by 10,000 a year, right? Or in Mike's case, a couple of billion, or increased revenue by a couple of billion.
And by the way, my biggest, dumbest mistake is I undercharged a lot of these people for the work. I had a conversation last week with a hiring manager, and I told him a little bit about the work that I'd done with recommender engines. And as I'm driving away, and he was interested. And as I'm driving away, talking with my wife and my son in the car, I think we were heading up to the ski resort. I said, I'm thinking it could be good to get in that business and just, go from company to company selling recommender engines. And my wife says, that's a lot of work. I said, well, I'm thinking of 3 different revenue models and I haven't picked one yet. One is I can charge them $100K to just go in and build it for them, and then another $75K a year to go update it. Another is I could charge them a subscription where, every month I just update it and charge accordingly. And then the third revenue model is, maybe what I do is I say, I'll join you in all the risk. But here's the deal. I get 0.1% of all incremental sales. Which, by the way, in one instance, a reasonable instance, that could get me $1 million from one client.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to be showing off. That's not the idea here. I mean, technique. That's all it is. It's just technique.
And it's so important for us to be capturing these as we go, because I don't know how many of you were in roles where you're like, this is my jam forever. I love the company. I love the role. I'm valued. I'm paid decently. And then all of a sudden life changes. And you're like, wow, I wish I had really captured all the crazy, wonderful things I did. And now I can't remember and I can't capture the impact because I no longer have access to the systems that would tell me what I was doing, right? So that's why another plug, and Steve, I think you hit on this as well. Always capture your impact, even if you think you're never going to need to demonstrate it, right? And you should be touting your impact on LinkedIn, in your resume, in case studies like what Mike has done, and also in your cover letters, because the impact with numbers is what gets them interested. It captures their interest and then opens the conversations. So Mike, thank you for that.
One quick thing I saw on that thing you just had up there, Mike, which I think is a good example, is the Sears portrait studio thing, and your data point was 20 years of life for a dying brand or something like that. That I think is just a note for everybody, is like there's always a number. There's always a number somewhere. You just have to think it through and find it. And I say this as somebody who knows this and has done this in, case studies and stuff, and struggled to do it for myself, like most marketers. But there's always a number. Sometimes you just have to like think laterally instead of horizontally, and find what the number impact is that you can write down.
Dax, marketing is a phenomenal skill. Unfortunately, it's grossly underrated. One organization I worked for, and I'm not bragging here, okay? I'm talking about the discipline that you practice, all right? All I did was improve the marketing for that organization, because that was my role, marketing director. And one day the head of sales, it was a small organization, so there was only one sales guy. He came into my office, he sat down, and he says, "Mike, I'm pissed at you." "Scott, why is that?" He says, "I'm a sales guy." I said, "I know that, and you're a good one too." He says, and that's how I define my entire career. It's what I love to do. But your stupid marketing has turned me into an order taker. Now, I left out a few of the choice terms that he used along the way. But so I just sat back, I smiled, and I said, "Well, enjoy the commission." And he smirked a little and he said, "I will, but maybe I need to hire another salesperson so I can concentrate on the hard stuff." So marketing is extraordinarily powerful when done right.
So I just put in the chat a little handout that might help people with accomplishments, start identifying them. I think it's one of the hardest things that we need to do, but I think it also helps if you're going through that moment of that roller coaster depression as a job seeker, when you realize, oh wow, I've done this and I've done that. And so as Mike has so eloquently showed us, we all possess something, a before and after picture that either we were part of individually or as a group. And we should spend time to have those. And it is Steve Botter's opinion that everybody has 2 bright ideas a year, a minimum. Some of you have more than that. But so if you've worked 10 years of your life, you got 20. You worked more than that, like I have, I got a lot of them. I need to sit down and put them down so everybody knows what they are. And I can't assume people know them. And I can play to the party who is interested in me by telling them what I bring to the table that they need to know about in my resume, my cover letter, to grab their attention, as Antoinette said.
And please go ahead and click on that link, save that link, download it, and scrub your resume, because that's what we'll be talking about. Is it next week, Steve, or the week after? We have a holiday in the middle, right?
Week after.
Okay, week after, because we'll be talking about power selling, just like what Mike gave us an insight into right now. We'll be talking about power selling yourself in the job hunt and in the interview process, because we so often, to Mike's point, undersell ourselves and undervalue ourselves, right? So we'll have that conversation before we have the last conversation around negotiation and that compensation package, which will be a really fun conversation because we have such a diverse group here. We have such a broad spectrum, right? But you have to know your worth, right? And that's not an Antoinetteism, right? You guys have heard that throughout your careers. You need to know your worth in order to build the confidence to demand your worth. And then when you know your worth, you are better prepared to take the steps you need to advocate for it. Okay. All right. Any other questions on boundaries? Anyone else as they were going through that worksheet? I'm going to challenge you guys, if you didn't have a chance to bounce that up against a trusted advisor. That could be a spouse, it could be a best friend, it could be a coworker. Bounce it off your trusted advisor, because they're likely going to point out something about you that you did not capture, or that you may not even be willing to accept quite yet, but it could be a boundary, right? Any other boundaries we want to talk about before we switch to accelerators real quick?
Don't be shy here.
All right. We're switching to accelerators. All right, Dax, do you want to pick who goes first through some accelerators and how to build questions around them?
Who haven't we heard from? Uh, I'm gonna pick somebody who I don't know or don't recognize if I've met in here before. Christian. If Christian has anything, maybe we'll give them a chance to speak.
Okay, Christian, you're off mute, but I don't hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes. Mhm.
Um, um, I'm not sure what to say. It's my first time here, and I'm kind of ignorant about what you're asking me.
All right, so we sent out a worksheet. You probably didn't have a chance to look at it yet, but we're talking about accelerators. And if we break accelerators down to what they are truly at the core, it's what types of things bring you joy in your work environment, or what types of things do you find yourself doing where you're in your zone, where time flies, where you could do this forever because you like it so much, or it just fits who you are and you love doing it. Like for Mike, he's a research geek. He could research forever ad infinitum to the point where the rest of us stop listening, right? But that's what he loves. That's his zone. That's one of his accelerators, to be able to do research when he needs to or when he wants to.
Oh, okay. So I guess probably uh, I guess along those lines, probably something for me is a similar answer. Guess I would say research, but not the same kind of research because I'm a scientist. So usually, if I have a question to figure out that involves um, figuring out a little bit of math and how to apply it to a physics problem, then I can sit and do that, and do that, and do that, and do that. Is that a decent answer?
That is a decent answer. Okay, so as you're job hunting, have you come across either interviews or job descriptions where you're like, is this present or can I do it the way I want to do it?
Yes. I haven't had any interviews of late, but yes, lots of job descriptions. So I I ended up losing my job because I had been working remotely with a place down in Mexico and couldn't work remotely. So it's not like there are a lot of places around looking to hire an atmospheric physicist. It's kind of interesting. So I've been trying to branch out and apply to other jobs, and yeah, most of the time I'm thinking, you know, what what about this is something that I could actually do that I meant to do the rest of my life? If that makes sense. So, like, I look at a lot of data science positions, and yeah, I wonder about this. Like, well, they're talking about research, but what kind of research is that? I don't understand it.
Okay. So Christian, you may not love, but I love the situation that you find yourself in because it's an adventure, right? You have a particular skill set in one area and you're looking at how do I diversify and apply it in a way that's going to capture their attention so that I can get the interview and show them that I am capable and competent of this. And Mike, I noticed that you came off mute. Did you want to comment?
Just a couple of things. Christian, my heart goes out to you on this completely. We're actually closer than you think because my research background, the stuff that I love to do is leans heavily into designed experiments and a lot of the statistical analysis around that sort of thing. So a lot of heavy scientific training that's, and I apply it to business, but you can apply it to the atmosphere. One of the things that I do when I hire somebody for a new position is I sit down and I talk with my HR recruiter, and I list out the job description, and it uses all the terms that fit to my team and what we all know. But the other thing that I'll ask my HR person to do is look for transferable skills. Now, I might be a little unusual in that, and in other areas, for all I know. But So what I'll do is I'll take the first 5 or 10 resumes that they think are even anywhere close, and I'll write here's what I love about this, and here's what I'd like to see or what I need that's not here. And one of the things that I do with my HR people is I list in their transferable skills. So if we're using, I'll take a fairly straightforward example. If we're using SQL and this person comes in knowing a different kind of platform or a different flavor of SQL, I'll tell my HR person that is a very transferable skill. I can move them over in less than a week, no problem. Somebody with your math and possibly statistical background, that there's a lot of transferable skill there. By the way, if you want to see some interesting thinking on data science, look up Matt Dancho, Dancho. He's a guy who's trying to sell a whole lot of data science training stuff online. He does peddle it in LinkedIn. He's also, I think, got a couple of YouTube videos, but it'll give you a sense for what one of the edge thinkers is doing in data science, just in case you want it on background. But to Antoinette's point, it's going to be hard to find somebody who thinks in terms of transferable skills. You're going to have to get past HR on that one and do solid networking. I don't really see an alternative.
Yeah.
And we also touched on this a little bit last week as well. So I'll bring it up again because it's relevant to Christian's situation, where someone asked the question, if it doesn't specifically say what I've specifically done, I can't list it on my resume, right? And I'm like, whoa, time out, wrong, right? Because I have a couple of clients who were project managers, and they're like, well, I use this project management system, but they want smart sheets. And I'm like, so, right? What project management systems did you use? Oh, well, I used this one and this one and this one. And I'm like, okay, then do a quick Google search and let AI show you what the main competitive advantages of each one are so that you can say, in addition to my research and data sciencing, I specifically have exposure to programs similar to that enable me to, right? Or I've had exposure to the tools that you're looking for, or to the theories that you're looking for in your resume, right? But to Mike's point, you got to be able to get through the weeding out in the system. So adjust your resume to that. I had someone who worked as a project manager forever, but she had titled herself as a virtual assistant. And I challenged her. I'm like, Jane, what did you do in your job? And she's like, well, I was a project manager. I'm like, did you at any time schedule any kind of personal stuff for this person? Or did you like schedule their hair appointments? All right. Or did you do anything that was personal assisting? And she's like, well, no, I was a project manager. And I'm like, then change your title, right? Change your title, adjust your focus, and how you spin yourself in your resume, in your cover letter, in your summary, in your 30-second sound bit, right? That's where the magic happens, because you aren't just an atmospheric scientist. You are a data researcher. You are, right? So think about all the things that you do that you have the skills for, instead of the titles that we've had put on us. And I think that may help you as you're weeding through things.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, to how we can take Christian's passion and turn that into an interview question so that he makes sure, as he's looking at this data science role, that it's relevant to him and it's not going to suck his soul, because we've all been in jobs that kind of sucked our souls. Or maybe it's just me. But it's kind of miserable when you get there and you can't do what you love, right? And a question that he could ask as he's in the interview process, or even as he's vetting the job with an HR person, is tell me about the role of research in this position. If you had to allocate a percentage to the amount of time that we're doing research, and you can even break it down, Christian, right? You can say data research or data validation research or external research versus internal, right? And Mike's probably cringing at my use of terms here, but have them break it down. What part of time is spent on this? And what do you find to be the value in these roles or in these responsibilities? Because you want to see, number one, is it going to be present so that you can have some joy in your job? And number two, does the company place value on what you're doing? Right? So for Dax, it could be for you, you could say, I could see your top 5 responsibilities or requirements are content marketing and research and marketing strategy and marketing programs. Right now, what do you need the most? And what does that look like to you? What does success look like? So that could be another way to filter out where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm dropping notes to Christian just because he's lit my brain on fire here.
Perfect.
So I'll share with the rest of the group here. So it seems to me that there are quite a few types of organizations that would value somebody with atmospheric science background, and so a couple of thoughts just off the top of my head. Be a civilian contractor with any of the military organizations, work with FedEx, UPS, even the Postal Service, because their ability to deliver can be impacted by atmospheric events. The company where I used to work, Fiserv, had a team of people that was all about managing risk, and included in that risk were people who were experts in climate. Because if a hurricane came through and took out one of our facilities, or temporarily took out a facility in Texas, executives wanted to know, okay, how fast can we get that back up online? What are the things that we've got to figure out? Where can we move things in between and all that sort of stuff? So there's some, when we're talking about the, Fortune 200 level companies, there might be more opportunities than you think to go through a risk management type of spot where you can, if you want, emphasize either your atmospheric physics background, or you can say you can bring in the research skills, and then you're close enough that if they need the atmospheric physics research, you can provide it.
Or even like insurance agencies as well, right? Always looking to mitigate risk. And what happens with insurance agencies, a lot of it is climate and atmosphere. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you. Really good suggestion. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. All right, Tammy, can we pull you into the conversation?
Can I
Go
can I
ahead.
chime in real quick? I don't want to talk too much, but I was starting to type this out, but I can say it faster than the essay I would write. I really like the way the word that is used on the worksheet, which is accelerator, and that chimes with something that I think about and have used to like dial in on my own values, which is what gives me energy. And very specifically, these two phrasings versus what do I love to do? Because to come back around to, my boundary, I love to write. I'm just so burned out on it because it's the only thing anybody will ever let me do. that it does not give me energy anymore. It drains away my energy. And so I have had to like really dial in on the things that do give me energy, and not, because sometimes those aren't the things that if someone just says, what do you love? That wouldn't occur to me. But when I really stop and think about it, the end of a work day, so an example for me is teamwork. Just being in a room, literally like collaborating with someone else. That's what gives me energy, where at the end of the day, I'm going home buzzing from my work day. And it's not something that would come to mind if I thought of it in terms of what do I love to do. So I think that for me personally, I find it very helpful to really think about it in terms of that phrasing of an accelerator.
I love that you point that out, Dax, because that is so, so true, right? What do I love? I love eating, right? But just eating at work or eating all day long isn't going to send me home with that buzz, right? What does send me home with a buzz is an opportunity for me to mentor and coach. And I was in one role where one of the executive team looked at me and he said, "Why are you mentoring my people? That's my job." And I'm like, "Do you not realize how difficult you are? Someone's got to help them figure out how to help you," right? But like they were trying to take that away from me, and I would have left the role, right? Because then I would have gone home every day with zero buzz. And we need to go home with buzz, right? We need to have that excitement. So, Tammy, in your roles, what are some of those accelerators, those things where you just hit your zone, where you have that buzz, where you're on top of the world and you're like, oh my gosh, I could do this forever. And you may not be the best at it, but it gives you energy.
Um, I think development. I think, working on development plans with employees, and really finding those opportunities for them. That really is exciting to me. While recruiting is something that's not exciting to me. And I seem to be pulled into it all the time. And it ends up taking so much of my time, and I can't focus on. So I can relate to what Dax was saying. You get pulled into those things that you can do well, and it doesn't leave time for anything else. And so then you kind of get pigeonholed. It's like, okay, well, you're just the recruiter. So, but yeah, development, career pathing, um, anything talent related. Onboarding. I love onboarding, just creating that employee experience. That's fun for me.
So you're likely going to come across job descriptions that list all of those things in the list of 5,000 job responsibilities, right? So as you get into, and when I'm talking to HR, I always feel like I'm preaching to the choir. So feel free to correct me, right? But as you get into those interviews, or even if you're just vetting the role with the HR person for the company you're going to work with, one of the questions can be, tell me about how the balance of this work is distributed across these three roles, right? And where is the focus? Or does the focus ebb and flow? And tell me about that, right? How does it ebb and flow? And as you're talking with the manager, questions that you can ask are, where do you see a need on your team? Or back to Mike's great question, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you change about your team, about the dynamic of the team, or about the skill set that's currently on your team? And then you can vet the answer. And if they don't give you the answer that you want, and you're really interested in the company, the manager hasn't given you the heebie-jeebies yet, and you're interested in the role, you could say, I love that answer. I've had experience in all of those things and returned really good results for my company, as you can see in the resume or cover letter. I didn't hear you say development. Tell me about the role of development in this HR group, and where does it lie, and what value does the company place on it? Because we all know that when the money is flowing freely, talent development is one of the top priorities that they tout in order to decrease their turnover and increase their retention. But when money gets tight, it's one of the first things to go,
Right.
unless you have a company that's really dedicated to it, right?
Mhm.
So that would be what you were trying to suss out, is what value does this company place on this, and how often would I get to play in it, right?
I think one of my challenges, though, is that my experiences with smaller companies. And so when I get to that part of the interview where they ask, um, what, what does your team look like? It's like, well, it's me, or it's me, and I had like one or two additional people on my team. And so then it ends the interview basically because they're like, well, you just don't have experience working with a larger organization. So I kind of, I feel like the positions that where they're really interested in me are these smaller companies where I have to wear all the hats. And so I can't really say, I don't know, it feels like I can't really just get to do development. I don't know how to get past that roadblock, like to show them. I mean, sure, it's a small organization, but I've worn many hats and my talent is scalable. So how do I do that? Because have had so many companies, well, they just end the interview right when they find out how small these organizations are
Mhm.
that I've worked for, and they don't really look at my talent.
So we tend to have our own self-limiting ways that we look at our experience, right? So in your case, while you may have just, right, that's a bad word, just worked with a small company, or you may have had to wear all the hats, change that narrative, kind of like what Mike showed us a little bit already and what we've talked about, in that you're going to be talking about the volume or the impact that you create. So don't artificially shrink your talent and ability by putting a box around the size of your team. Talk instead about the number of talent development conversations that you're able to have, or how you helped a employee move from a PIP to top performer of the year, or how you helped a leader change their management style in order to better adapt to the needs of their team, or to change their perspective on an employee, right? And you can do that broad spectrum in a way that doesn't artificially limit your capacity and your capabilities. Now, if they directly ask you, tell me about the size of your team. So Tammy, this is where we play the mental game. And Steve or Mike, you have to be my conscience here, right? When someone says, tell me about the size of your team, I'm not going to tell you that my team was 3, me and 2 executive vice presidents. I'm going to tell you that my team was 1,800 employees worldwide, right? So if someone asks you to tell them about the size of your team, you're not going to say, well, it was just me. You're going to say, well, we had over 300 employees in the team, and this is how we work together.
And I think to add to that, the personal touch is I was able to, work individually and help some of those people. When I saw the need to exist, I stepped in to help them if they were open to help. And we may only have 3 stories, and that's all we need, or 1.
I think there's also an advantage to working for smaller firms, that you can position, and maybe you've already thought of this, but to me, it's you've got the bureaucratic juggernaut, and they always hate being called bureaucratic. To which I reply, well, if you don't want to be called it, don't act like it. And I have actually said that to executives in a large bureaucratic organization, and I did not get fired for doing so, although once I got admonished. But the advantage coming from a smaller organization is that you can come from someplace that's agile, nimble, cross-functional, and gives you the ability to work well with multiple functions to back up and support one another when needed. I mean, just position all those strengths. Maybe get Dax to write your description on that, if he doesn't mind the writing.
Sometimes I'm happy to help because, like I said, it's stupidly hard for me to do it for myself. And the other day, I was listening to a friend who does videography give his elevator pitch, and within like 30 seconds of his 3-minute fumbling through, and he's been doing this for a decade, I had a better one for him, but it struggled to do it myself. So really, if anybody does need some help, most of us are connected on LinkedIn or will be. I'm happy to help anybody else too. If my skills can help anybody else here find their job, love it.
And that's one of the things, Tammy, that I love doing with some of my PHP clients is they come in and they're like, well, I was just an analyst, or I was just a caregiver, or I was just, right? And what we don't realize is all the things that those roles and how we engage with those roles, how they unlock incredible talents that no one else has, right? And so that would be another thing for you to do is think about not just what your accelerators are, talent development, but what are some of these other things that you've been able to experience in your smaller company roles where you're like, wow, I did that. And HR people who come in from big organizations, they're pigeonholed. They've only done talent development, or they've only done PIPs, or they've only done pivots, right? Whereas you have a broader spectrum.
Right. And I try to use that, but it's like they're just like, well, they're looking for someone who's worked for a larger organization.
Okay, and so Tammy, can I give you kind of a counterpoint to that, right? Because we tend to just take what's given to us. Oh, well, you're not the right person for the role. And what I would do is I would say, tell me what skills you found, right? Do you notice the change in my words? What skills have you found that people coming from larger organizations bring to this role?
That's a good question.
Because then you're challenging without being annoying, or well, you're probably going to be annoying, but you're not being cranky or you're not being itchy, right? So, because you want to know, right? And you can say, oh, that's interesting. I did A, B, C, D, E. That's similar to what you just described. And then what you're also looking for, and I'm a huge, like, this is my soapbox with all capital letters in the most annoying font possible. You also are interviewing them. And if you are finding that they are closed-minded and they're not willing to think about opportunities, or Mike, what was the word you used? Transferable skills, right? If they're not willing to see how the skills that you have can be transferred across to what they think they need, then Tammy, walk away, because that's not an organization you want to be in.
Okay.
My heart really goes out to HR people. I got to tell you, I went into a layoff meeting where I was being laid off. I knew it was coming because I was close enough to the board of directors. I could see the looks on their faces when they were meeting, and I knew what day. I could have guessed the hour. In fact, I went to the dentist's office to get my teeth done before that happened, the morning of. And anyway, so I went in and I knew what was coming. I'd already packed all my stuff and taken it home, except for a very small box, so that I didn't look like I'd stolen anything. And I went into the meeting with Tina from HR, and I knew her, from our work together before. I walked in and I threw my arms around wide and I said, "You must be having a really stinky day." And I gave her a great big hug. And she says, "You're the one getting let go. Why are you comforting me?" And I said, "Tina, one thing I've learned is that most people get into HR because they care about people. And then you get stuck doing crap like this." And the rest of the meeting was pretty good. I reassured her that, look, I'd already started my own business. I was ready to go. I was going to take the weekend off, maybe a couple of days, and then, turn the key and I'm going. I've already got clients lined up and everything. So it was a good day for me. Didn't have that one with the last one, by the way. But my heart goes out to good folks like you in HR who are trying to help people, and now you're finding that so much of it has turned into compliance and bureaucracy. It's such a pain in the backside. I wish I could wave a magic wand and fix that. Maybe stick with the smaller companies.
Yeah. Haven't had, I don't know, there's just the jobs that are posted are a lot of larger companies. So I really would like to work for a larger company so that I can just focus on one thing and not have to worry about all the other things. But
So Tammy, that could be something that you investigate too, is being able to specialize might be an accelerator for you, or it might be important enough that it's a boundary and a non-negotiable. Okay? And I've had one HR person come back to me after an interview when I was in the top 3 finalists, and I actually knew the person who was in the top 2. But she came back to me and she said, "Hey, let me walk you through why you weren't selected for the role." And I'm like, wow, this is a great opportunity, right? And the things that she pointed out was direct feedback from the interview panel, and some of it she agreed with, and some of it she didn't. And she was honest enough to tell me what part she didn't agree with. Like some of it was pretty lame. Like I wasn't selected because I used the terms EVP and VP, and they didn't know what those were. And I'm like,
wow.
So yeah, I don't want to be involved in that group, right? But that was good for me to hear that from her, right? So as you're going through these, and if you are deselected for a role, it's always okay to say, "I realize that you have confidentiality. I realize that you have so much on your plate. Could you spend 5 to 10 minutes with me and give me some critical feedback?" You don't even have to say critical feedback. Give me some feedback that will help me achieve my goal, which is to become a talent development person in a mid-size organization. And if you narrow it down like that for them, the probability of them saying yes, especially if you throw in buying them coffee or sending them a gift card for Starbucks, right? The probability of them saying yes increases, and then you have that perspective from someone in the trenches. And always network back with that person, because chances are the person they hire, they're not going to be thrilled with. Right? So keep those doors open, always open, where you can just circle back and say, "Hey, I found this great article on LinkedIn. It relates to this that we talked about. Hope you're having a great weekend." And to Steve's point, always reach out to people on holidays. Hope you have a safe and enjoyable holiday. Right?
That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, to go with that, Tammy, just for you and for everybody else who's listening to this in their own way, Friday at a networking event, you shared with me that, you're ultimately, I think I'd like to be a business partner. And, and that's a different role that HR's taken on the last 10, maybe 15 years. And so that's a pivot in HR. Maybe on your resume, we add a different part that we wouldn't normally add, which is that objective state pivot. I'm looking to move into this business partner. And then my question would be, what have you done in the past that is similar to a business partner, even though you haven't held that role, we play to the audience. What skills are required for that? Do you have them? Are they on your resume? If not, you're not a good fit. We're not connecting the dots. And I like Antoinette said, we're preaching to the choir, which is HR, but HR, just like any other human being, what they read in the resume speaks to them or does not speak to them. And so how could I tell you that you're not a good fit is because the resume you have doesn't connect with the audience itself.
And I love that. And I'm going to like kind of drive it home a little bit in that we tend to define ourselves by the titles that we've been given instead of the roles that we've played. That would be like someone saying, oh, well, you're just a mom, or well, you're just a dad, right? Oh, well, let me tell you the roles that I play as a mom, or let me tell you the roles that I play as a dad, right? And it's not what comes to mind when people hear the title. So being able to break that down, and I put Chris M through this a lot in the first little bit that we worked together, where she was like, well, I was just, and I was an analyst, or I did this. And I'm like, okay. And we got down to the point where she had uncovered fraud at an exponential level, and she had done this and she had done that. It wasn't her title, but it was her role, her skill set, her drive, and every other intangible thing about her that had created this incredibly powerful person who could take on XYZ in all these different roles, right? So don't limit yourself by the titles that you've held. Think about the roles and what brings you joy and what doesn't, right? Like in Dax's case, he's a phenomenal writer, doesn't want to do that for the rest of his life, right?
That's very valuable. Thank you.
I think one thing all of us need to eliminate from our verbiage is the word just. No, I am. An I am statement needs to take that place. And I'm looking for it here. If none of you watch the Super Bowl, that is great. If you did just for the commercials, like some of us, there was one really good one, and I don't know if you guys saw it out there. It was the one about the stay-at-home dad who was interviewing. Who saw that commercial? Anybody? Let's see. Okay, that I'm going to find that here in a minute. I'm sure it's on YouTube, and I'm going to pop it in the chat as we're continuing on here. But there's a stay-at-home dad who is prepping for an interview, and he's been home. Maybe his wife was the main breadwinner. Oh wait, Antoinette was one of those people. I know in that day, and it was, I think a Google helping you prepare for that interview, and it was powerful. Again, who saw that? Okay, would you guys agree that was a powerful commercial? I'm going like, wait a sec, this is my space. I got to watch this commercial. Might have to play that one back. I'm going to find it for you, but Tammy, it's not just for you, but it's for everybody here and here. But that might be something to go about. And we use all these different AIs to help us. And I think they are helpers to help us maybe pull out the best of us that we can't see in ourselves. And that's AI. I mean, Antoinette says, go to our people that are, in this, talk to your trusted advisors. Well, what if you don't have a trusted advisor? What if you give it to some AI and it helps pull some stuff out still? I don't know. Maybe that wasn't where Antoinette said I should go.
This is one where I believe in the real humans, but you can use the AI to validate the data. So guys, we've been at this for like an hour and a half at this point. I would challenge you to go back through the boundaries and the accelerators and put some time into them, because they're going to tell you about you in a way that enables you to design questions for the interview space. And I don't know about you, but I've encountered interviews where they assume that they just get to grill me for 60 minutes. So I always set the expectation going into an interview, and I preface it with, I know you guys have a lot of questions for me, especially if it's a panel, because we all know how effective those are. And I also have questions for you. As I look at my questions specific to this role, I probably have about 5 to 10 minutes worth of questions at the end. How are we going to make sure that we have time for your questions and mine? And if they approach it with a standpoint of, well, you can talk to HR about your questions, I say, no, these are questions specifically for you as the leaders and peers in the team. How do we make sure that we have time for both? And if they're not willing to come to the table with that, then for me, because collaboration is one of my non-negotiables, that's a red flag for me, right? Or if they come back and they say, well, our questions typically take a full 60 minutes, then I say, and do you have flexibility to add on 10 for me? And see if they're willing to come to the table, right? And that's that negotiation where you start to practice that. It's not being mean, or it's not being stubborn, or it's not being uncooperative. It's saying, this is what I need out of this experience. I'm giving you this much of my time. Can you give me that much of your time? Okay.
I'll add just a thought, if I may, Antoinette. I like to approach the interview like a ping pong game. They're gonna swat a question across the net. I'm going to address it, and then I'm going to swat one right back. And if I'm going in prepared with enough questions, then it becomes a really nice balanced game. Now, once in a while there'll be a foul, but you just got to figure out how to address that.
Right.
But I'm like you on that one, Antoinette. If they're not willing to answer questions, then why should I spend the time with them? I do sometimes find that the questions that I need to ask are not well addressed by an HR person who doesn't know the team very well. Now, if the HR person does know the team really well, that's a good indicator to me. I like that.
Yeah. And I love that you bring that up as well, because they may ask a question and you may have warning signs go off in your head, or you may have like the angels start singing hallelujah because you're like, this is my jam. I love this. And you want to ask that follow-up question. And that's where those situational questions come into play, right? Like they may ask you, tell me, like, what's a really interesting one that I've had? Tell me about how you manage conflict with your manager. So what kind of warning bell does that send me?
So I would answer that question, and then I would come back with a question: how often is that an issue?
Yes. Yep. Or tell me about a time when someone managed that conflict really well, because that tells you how that manager wants to be engaged, right? And you can split it up and you can say, tell me about a time where someone managed that conflict really well. And then you can wait for them and you're like, that's a really great answer. And then you could pile it on, like Braden mentioned, right? This is how I did similar in the past. So you kind of solidify, I can play this game if this is what you need. And then you ask the follow-up question. Now tell me about a time where it really wasn't managed well. Tell me about the impact to your team, right? So that you're building that bigger picture so that you know about this person and this culture. All right. Any burning questions that you guys have where you're like, well, yeah, we did a lot of this, wah, 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 but you didn't answer my burning question.
Hey, this is Brad. I've got two questions real quick, and maybe just a quick comment for Tammy. And that, a lot of enterprises are using Workday, so maybe some self-study on Workday to have a skill in that enterprise software application, or a certification like SHRM that just kind of shows that you have, a next level, talent, if you will. But my biggest question is, it seems like most of the interviews, at the end result, they have several qualified people, and if you're interviewing down the road, you've got an assumption on their end that you're qualified. Isn't the real question that they're asking is, are you one of us? Like, will you fit? And I don't know that we've addressed, how we've talked about what we do and what helps us, but how do we help convey to an employer without knowing that much about them, how we can be a fit? Does that make sense?
That's a really good question, Brad. And I think part of that goes into the research that we do ahead of time, right? Finding out as we look at the company how they phrase their job description. We talked a lot about that last week, right? What are some warning signs? What are some good signs that we see in those job descriptions? And then how are we using Glassdoor to see what kind of vibe they're creating with their employees? What do we see when we looked at their website? And what kind of questions are we asking the HR person or the management team as we come into the interviews, right? Because to your point, we're looking to see if we're a fit or if they're a fit for us. Okay. So that goes back to that. Make sure you know what your boundaries are. Make sure you know what your accelerators are so that you can ask those questions and you can flat out ask them. And I have done this before to say, tell me about your company values and tell me about someone who just fit those values perfectly and was the perfect complement for your team. And then in that narrative, you can hear whether or not that's you. And you can say that I love how you brought that up. I actually have experienced that too, or this is how I've operated in a previous company. So back to that question from Braden before of once we hear what they're looking for, how do we reiterate that we're the person for that? And again, you have that dynamic of where we have the filters that happen on the front end, those technology filters that probably screen us out more than we want to acknowledge. And then we also have the human filters, right? Where we've all been in the situation where we meet someone and instantly we are best friends for life. And we meet someone and we instantly can't stand them, right? And that happens in the interview environment as well, where like that last job where I walked into the room and I said one thing and I instantly was on that person's bad list, right? And there's not much that we can do to control that, but we can come in knowing ourselves. And the more we know ourselves, the more confidence we have in ourselves. And when we have those two in play, so the knowledge plus the confidence equals our ability to navigate that situation to the best of our ability. It reduces our anxiety. Like when I spend the time to know myself and to be prepared and have those questions, I walk into those interviews with a lot more confidence and a lot less noise in my own head so I can hear what's really going on in the interview and in the room. I don't know if that answered your question, Brad.
I think it's close. I've had, and I've just kind of started my job search since the first of the year, but I've had a lot of first and second interviews, and then I've kind of fizzled out. And of course, you only need one, in this game of looking for a job. But it just seems like um, I'm not sure if I need to, and I haven't looked for a job for a decade, right? So it's a little bit of a retooling of my capabilities, but. Yeah, and I love that. And I just took, I mean, not to, I just had a couple of quick notes when we talk about, how do you define what's going on? And I always try to ask, is this a new position or a backfill position? And what did the last person do well? And what did the last person, what do you think they could have improved on? Um, because that can really help you understand where they're coming from. Is it growth? Is it just, we hire and fire people on a 60-day plan. We just bring them in. We don't really interview hard. We bring them in and then we pip them out if they don't cut it in 90 days. And I'm more on the sales side, so I see that maybe a little bit more. But
Right.
I've just tried to figure out how I can do a better job of fitting what they're looking for. That I think is my weakness right now, and
Mhm.
it's just something I need to sharpen the saw on.
Right. Yeah, I love how you bring that up because one of my last organizations was a sales and marketing organization. And you're right, that happens, right? And so when I come into interviews, I may ask them those same questions, like, is it a new position? Is it an old position? Are we backfilling it? Have we restructured the role because of what we found as we worked with the role previously? And then I also ask, what's your desired outcome with this role? What impact is this role going to create if it's done right? Or you can use more positive words. When it's done right, what impact does this role create? Right? Because then you can suss out whether or not they know the power of the position or the role that they've created and what they want out of it. Right? Because oftentimes we'll throw head count at something just because a client comes in and says, I want a team of 10. Okay, so we build a team of 10. Well, what does that mean? Right? What's the desired outcome? Do they want 1,000 new leads a month that translates as it goes down the funnel into 10 new clients? Or do they really want 1,000 new clients every month? And what are we doing for that? So what's the desired outcome? And then in a sales role or a research role or a quality role specifically, what tools are in place to enable that success? Right? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I just put in the chat. I'll peel off and we can wrap. But thank you so much for those responses. I appreciate them.
Any other questions? Because we are almost at the hour.
I do have one quick question, Antoinette.
Yeah.
We won't be meeting for 2 weeks. What does everybody need to be doing? If they haven't, should they continue to be going through this? And hopefully everybody sees that. If you don't, I'll make sure you get that. But what else would you recommend before we meet in 2 weeks?
So definitely go through those, expand your vision and your understanding of yourself, pressure test it, even if you have to pressure test it against ChatGPT because no one else will talk to you, right? And then also work on
I'll talk to you guys.
work on your 30-second pitch, right? Dax, you bringing that up is a great intro to what we're going to be doing next week. I recently worked on a 30-second pitch with someone, and just, guys, we are horrible at seeing our value, right? We are horrible at seeing our value and being able to articulate it. So we're going to work on it. Bounce it off of a trusted advisor, right? Or bounce it off of ChatGPT. Let's see what they come up with. And then let's bring that and see if, Steve GPT, I like that.
Mike could give us a lesson on maybe not GPT, but AI.
Yep.
And we all need to learn how to talk to AI. Speaking of talking to humans, we need to learn how to talk to AI to get what we want from AI.
Right.
And
Dax.
try out different ones. Find the one that works for you. I'm doing consulting while I'm looking for a job. I was on a phone call with a client the other night, and she put something in the chat GPT, and she was like, "This answer makes no sense." And so then she put it in. I don't know which other one she put it into next, and she's like, "Okay, this cleared it up for me." So, like with any tools, any of the software tools, any whatever, find the one that works for you, because it might not be Chat GPT. So.
Right. And Brad, to the industry that you've played in, right? We're going to talk about power selling ourselves. So bring your sales background and your sales skills, your marketing experience, and your other experience in other domains. Bring that to the conversation, because we'll be focusing on how do we power sell ourselves instead of just summarizing our skills and experience.
Okay. Well, I'm going to end this recording. Thank you, Antoinette, for today. Let's show her a big round of applause. Thank you.